Greetings everyone. It's very good to see you again. Welcome to another Kumi session about the situation, and we're going to focus today on the gender element of gender oppression within the Palestinian reality currently. Yesterday marked the International Day for Children's Rights, and on the 25th is going to mark the International Day of Women's Rights. And we invited our special guest to come and share with us regarding the topic for today, which will be on gender oppression. So before I introduce her, let me go over some housekeeping rules and then we can begin the session. So this session is being recorded live and will be uploaded to YouTube. So if you wish to remain anonymous or turn off your camera, now is the time to do so. We will have a beginning. The structure of this session will have a half an hour presentation, around half an hour, then around 15 minutes of Q&A, and then we will have a the last 15 minutes, the last section of our meeting will focus on our Kumi action of this week. During the session, please remain respectful in the comments and sensitive. And any questions you have, please post them on the chat. And I will do my best to ask them towards our speaker of today. Budur, are you with us? Can you hear us?
Sorry. Hello.
Hello, Budur.
Sorry, I'm having to turn off my video just because it's been a messy day. So, hello everyone. Hope my voice can play a sufficient role. I'm sorry for that. So yeah, I mean, when Samuel approached me, I was supposed to talk about gender oppression within the Palestinian society and how it intersects with other forms of violence and oppression that Palestinians face. But we all know what's been going in Gaza for the past 40 plus days. And it seems that it's impossible to talk about anything else, really. That does not mean we marginalize other forms of oppression, that because there is a war in Gaza, suddenly Palestinian patriarchy stopped being abusive of women, or that these issues are somehow have been relegated. Of course not. Even I can imagine that, especially at times like these, there are risks always to notice more and more an increase in violence against women in particular. But simply because in terms of how we're thinking, it's been really difficult to actually focus on anything but what's going on right now in Gaza. And to help bear witness through the work that we do documenting Israeli violations of Palestinian human rights, documenting attacks on women, how this war obviously affects everyone, but how it has a specific and special impact on women and women's lives. And also another day that is coming soon is the International Day for People with Disabilities on the 3rd of December. And in my presentation, I'm also going to shed some light on what it's and also the effect of Israel's incessant bombardment, collective punishment measure, intensification of the blockade into an all-out siege, preventing access to fuel, food, water, and other humanitarian aid, including hygiene, how all of this is also affecting different women within Gaza, including Palestinian women with disabilities. So that's going to be my focus of this presentation. So just to give you an idea, throughout my work as a researcher at Amnesty International, we've been documenting since the start of the war, Israel's bombardment. And in terms of how that falls under international law, we've already documented evidence for war crimes by Israel, including indiscriminate bombardment and also direct attacks against civilians and civilian property, the use of collective punishment, which is a war crime, against Palestinians. Obviously, collective punishment is prohibited under the Article 33 of the Geneva Convention and Article 50 of the Hague Regulations. The siege that Israel is imposing on Palestinians in Gaza, blocking fuel and saying that because they are quote unquote fighting human animals, they would react as such. And since then, for almost 3 weeks, no type of humanitarian aid was allowed into Gaza until the 21st of October. And even then, whatever humanitarian aid is allowed through the Rafah crossing is A, insufficient, B, it's not distributed across the Gaza Strip, so it only enters through to the southern parts of Gaza, excluding the north. And C, includes very little fuel. Only the first time that fuel was allowed to enter Gaza was a week ago, also through the Rafah crossing. And that obviously is disastrous for everyone. And important when we say that I'm going to focus on women, not out of the patronizing idea that tends to speak about women and children and exclude men. Surprise, surprise, there are also men civilians in Gaza. I know it's shocking, but yeah, it is. There are hundreds of thousands of male civilians in Gaza. So, and it's when we were focusing on women, it's particularly because there are ways in which the siege and the bombardment are affecting women. And this we managed to collect through interviews and understand more fully through interviews, especially with internally displaced women living in UNRWA-run shelters across the Gaza Strip, talking with women who have had to go through amputations after their homes were bombed by the Israeli forces, and also and how family roles have changed, obviously, and the increasing difficulty that this war has in women, especially in families that were torn apart, where some members of the family stayed in one place, other members of the family moved to a different place, all for seeking safety. But it is increasingly glaring that in Gaza right now, there is nowhere safe from Israeli bombardment, which again is both indiscriminate and so systematically indiscriminate that what Israel is doing is tantamount to direct attacks against civilians. So, and I'll try to be as brief as possible because we don't just want to pile misery on everyone. But to start with things that we probably don't think about. So when we're talking about how it's like for women. So first of all, the main center for women who are victims of domestic violence or survivors of domestic violence in Gaza City has received, free as every part in Gaza City, has received numerous warnings by the Israeli authorities to evacuate. Its director has decided to stay with the women who are seeking shelter in that place. So fortunately, this place is still okay in terms of it has not been directly attacked yet. But all those staying in the shelter, including its director, have not had access to electricity, have not had access to humanitarian aid because of where they are in Gaza City. So their location means, and the fact that they cannot relocate elsewhere because of the vulnerable situation of women who are seeking shelter in that place, who'd been living there before the war, means that they are struggling to even stay afloat. The second thing is what it's like to be a woman in the schools, in the IDP schools. So first of all, the kind of division in the schools is, first of all, we're talking about schools that originally have capacity to receive a certain number of people. They are receiving quadruple or even more the number of the people beyond any capacity that these schools have. They are desperately ill-equipped to receive all this number of people. So what happened is that usually women and children sleep inside the classrooms. So a classroom where usually 20, 25 students, pupils study, now is home to more than 150 Palestinian women and children, one classroom. Or everyone sleep on the floor. Usually on one mattress, several people have to share one mattress, have to share 3 or 4 people have to share a blanket because of the dearth of this material. What's also incredibly difficult due to lack of access to clean water is women's access to hygienic products, including menstrual pads, including during their periods. And we've heard some harrowing testimonies of women who said they have not been able to shower for 40 days almost, that we're talking about 150 or more people sharing one toilet, which obviously affects everyone. But imagine the effect that this has on women when there are A, no access to pads, and B, no access to clean water. So people have to invent ways sometimes just to be able to actually make it. In addition to lack of painkillers, in addition to the fact that it's always crammed with women and children. We've talked with women who, and especially young girls, teenagers, who had been even embarrassed to leave the school, the classroom for a second. Amidst all this, obviously, there is the other thing which is concerning pregnant Palestinian women, especially Palestinian women who gave birth or have to give birth, sometimes with no access to anesthetics, and due to the difficulty, due to the situation at hospitals, they have to go through complicated surgeries. We interviewed one woman who, after the bombing of her house, she was taken to hospital. She was 8 months pregnant and she had to give birth at the hospital. Her baby was taken immediately to the incubator. But on the same day of the bombardment, she lost her 11-month-old baby who died in her arms during the bombardment. And what she says is she had her arm amputated. She cannot even carry her daughter. She told me, I did not feel like I've even given birth at all. It does not feel real. Nothing feels real. In addition to obviously why there is such massive number of women among the victims, for the past week, unfortunately, the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza has not been able to update the number of casualties because of the total destruction of Gaza's health system and healthcare system by Israeli forces, including the hospitals. We know that the number is well over 13,000 people killed since the start of the war, including also, which does not include over 2,000 people who are still, more than 2,000 people who are still under the rubble and it has been impossible to reach them. So the question is why there is also such a massive number among the victims of women. It's because in many occasions, women who flee with their children looking for safety, either in central Gaza or in the south tend to pack the homes. So we're talking about rooms that are so full of women and children, and the type of munitions that the Israeli forces use, and the type of building, the fact that the entire building collapses on the heads of its residents, and the fact that, as we said, the bombardment has been so indiscriminate that it can be considered tantamount to direct attacks, means that entire families are wiped away. Sometimes we can talk about just sole survivor, 1, 2 survivors of the same family. We've documented several cases where over 20 members of the same family, women, children, men, have been killed. And in many occasions, there were no one left. So there are cases where the children have no one else staying by them because everyone else in the family left. In such circumstances, obviously, we're talking about a situation that has devastated the entire society, has, in a sense, rearranged the Palestinian family. So the struggle is also in this is a struggle for survival. And women, those who survive, some of them injured, some of them wounded seriously, some of them have had limbs amputated, suddenly find themselves in a situation where they have to take care of an entire family, those who remained of that family, not knowing what tomorrow would bring, not knowing if they will get access to prosthetic limbs at any point in the future, or if they can rebuild their lives anew, or if they can leave Gaza to receive treatment, as they are not allowed to receive any type of treatment with the exception of painkillers, basically, at hospitals. So all this violence, state-sponsored violence on women, means that this war has been particularly devastating for women, particularly devastating for women with disabilities. And the numbers, we still don't have an idea how many women have had limbs amputated, or have suffered permanent disabilities, or have been maimed due to the ongoing war. But what is clear is that this number will continue to grow as long as there is no ceasefire, no immediate ceasefire in the horizon. And women will continue to bear the brunt of that, which also means that even when the war ends, even when the dust of the war settles down, as they say, and people start rebuilding their lives, they will start from an exponentially worse place than any other previous war. They're not even starting from square one. They would have to start from way back, which means how to rebuild a society which has been torn apart by bombardment and by so many killings, by killings of entire generations of Palestinians. We've documented cases where grandparents, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren all died in the same house. How people who have been displaced and face the risk of permanent displacement will deal with that waves of exodus and displacement. Not to mention that we already talk in Gaza, more than 70% of the population are already refugees who were displaced from their homes and villages in 1948, and who have been denied their right of return, and who face the very grim possibility of being denied the right of return again to places they were displaced from in northern Gaza and in Gaza City permanently. The reconstruction process, we're talking about both physical reconstruction and its difficulties, but also psychological and emotional reconstruction of all that these people have lost, of the fact that so far people have not even had the possibility to mourn their dead properly, to grieve properly, to actually make amends or with all that happened. So this affects the entirety of the social fabric in Gaza, but when it comes to women, it has an even greater effect in terms of how these women, especially in households, would be able to rebuild their lives, their families again, with this level of loss that they suffered, with this level of destruction that they have to deal with. So yeah, this is the kind of violence, and this is why when we always say fighting all forms of violence against women, it's always kind of, we see this multiplicity of layers of violence: the patriarchal violence, the state-sponsored violence, the militaristic violence. And this is why we always repeat that feminism can never be militaristic or pro-militaristic. I've seen even celebrations sometimes of female soldiers who serve in the Israeli army, borsam, that is seen as somehow, ridiculously enough, as a mark of progress, or how Israeli women, liberal Israeli women, have been fighting to grant women in the army the privilege of becoming pilots and serving in combat roles in the Israeli army. And somehow Israeli feminists see that as a mark of progress, not knowing that they are part of a machine, first of all, of an apartheid system against all Palestinian, a machine that harnesses and supports and bolsters apartheid against the entirety of the Palestinian people wherever Israel controls their rights. But also this type of militaristic violence that does not spare anyone, that affects all Palestinians, including women. So any feminism worth its salt has to really be strongly opposed to Israeli militarism, to this form of form of bombardment, of siege, of blockade. Again, we're talking about a blockade that has been going on in Gaza since 2007, affecting women's access to healthcare, including women who need to receive treatment for breast cancer and other forms of illnesses, and affecting the families. And every time women, after every single Israeli war, women, men, and children in Gaza have to rebuild their lives all over again, have to try to restart. This time it will be even more difficult than any time before, because of the unparalleled level of Israeli destruction, even compared to previous wars, and because of the trauma, the devastation that this war has caused. So yeah, with this optimistic note, I'm open the floor for any questions, comments, notes, criticism. Feel free.
Thank you, Budur. We also forgot to introduce you at the beginning, so I'll introduce you after you finish your presentation. That Budur Hassan works with Amnesty International, is an active writer concerning issues of human rights, Palestinian feminism, politics, and disability. And she's also a frequent face at the Sabil office. Budur, thank you so much for that presentation. And for anyone who wants to ask any questions, please put them in the chat and I'll try my best to ask them for Budur. I'll start off. There's a familiar term called white feminism, and it kind of shows that it is a selective feminist struggle that doesn't address women's concerns within the global south in general, and now we can see them in Palestine, where women bodies are clearly targeted and are clearly vulnerable from a state-sponsored and sanctioned violence towards women. Are you aware of any sort of challenge to certain groups that claim they are feminist but actually do not stand up for Palestinian women?
Can you please repeat the question? I
Sure.
mean,
So there's different groups of they consider themselves feminist, but when it comes to Palestine and in general issues of the global South, they are generally silent. They do not address the state-sanctioned, sponsored violence against women from the global South, as we are witnessing in Gaza right now. Are you aware of any initiatives, groups, voices that criticize those sort of selective feminist groups?
Yeah, of course. I mean, for a long time, the Palestinian feminist movement has been critical of whatever you want to call it. I think you can call it different names. You can call it liberal feminism, white feminism, global north feminism, hegemonic feminism. It's not really, it's not about naming, and it also is not about it's not just about colors. Also, there is a feminism from a certain class as well. But I'd say that this is also the fact that, you know, you have, as every ideology, there is all forms of feminisms, and yeah, so it's the Palestinian feminist movement have always been critical of the selective feminism, and has always positioned the Palestinian struggle for liberation also as a feminist struggle. So it's pretty much all feminist movements in Palestine have been critical.
Thank you. There's a question here for you, Budur. How do you receive reports from Gaza? What type of communication is possible?
Yeah, we had a field at Amnesty. We had a field worker who's based in Gaza, and I think I'll probably also answer the other questions about Amnesty's silence. So since the 7th of October, we have been issuing reports. We issued a report about, and I can share links later with you all, about evidence. We documented 5 emblematic cases that demonstrate how Israel directly or indiscriminately attack Palestinian homes. Just yesterday, we issued a report about the bombardment of the St. Porphyrius Church in Gaza and the bombardment of another home in Nuseirat titled Nowhere Safe in Gaza. We issued a report about the warnings and how these warnings amount to forcible transfer and forced displacement of the Palestinian population. We issued a report about the torture and other ill treatment to which Palestinians in the West Bank are subjected to. And we issued a report about how Israeli warnings to a hospital and urgent action about the warnings against hospitals to evacuate hospitals, and again how that amounts to forcible transfer. And we're working on a report about the effect of the war on Palestinian women with disabilities, especially women who went through amputations. So while always one tries to document as much as possible, because of the difficulty in communication, it's been a challenge. But thankfully, at Amnesty, it's one of the very few organizations that still maintains an active presence, an active field worker on the ground. We talk with survivors, victims, medics, review medical reports, through our field workers, get in touch with people who have been wounded or injured or permanently disabled, or families of people who were killed during attacks. And push on and continue to exert pressure, including on the office of the prosecutor, to demand that the file against Israel within the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and the case which was opened in 2021, that is promptly revived, because this is an urgent and immediate urgency. And finally, to add that also Amnesty issued a call for immediate and immediate ceasefire by all parties, knowing that the only solution to this man-made catastrophe is an immediate ceasefire by all parties, because without this ceasefire, the catastrophic circumstances in Gaza, including the lack of access to food, fuel, and water, cannot be resolved without ceasefire. People cannot receive the life-saving treatment that they so desperately need, and people cannot even begin counting their dead or mourning their dead without an immediate ceasefire. So to answer your question in two, basically. So we tried, despite the difficulty of communication, we interview the researchers at Amnesty, interview survivors, victims, witnesses. And through our field work in Gaza, we visit locations and sites that were subjected to Israeli bombardment. And through our evidence lab team, we geolocate these geolocate bombardments, analyze satellite imagery, and this is how we find and arrive at our evidence in cases to decide that what Israel did was a war crime or amounts to war crime and should be investigated as such.
Budur, it's the response even in countries of the West, perhaps especially in countries like the UK and the US, you see the younger generation, the Gen Z, millennials, but particularly Gen Z, statistically being more pro-Palestinian than the previous generation. And they're the ones who are going much more into protests and are active more online. How has the protests and the online, I guess, activism, how has that pressure and changed perhaps the discourse since the 7th of October?
Yeah, it's obviously has been huge to see the spark, the strength, the energy, and the courage also of these protesters. Kind of don't like and don't always like the generational gap, because I feel sometimes we can be unfair to older people. It's been also impressive to see so many people, including Holocaust survivors, actually take to the streets and say not in our name, which is also equally inspiring. But I guess it also has to do with what type of media, the access to different forms of media. So we know that traditional media tends to focus on something, but the younger people can probably have access to blogs, to TikTok, to Instagram, to other medium of communication that the older generations probably don't see that much, and they kind of see how people of their age are to what they are being subjected to in Gaza, which really changes how they view things. Which also there is this commitment, or I'd say this immediate anger at injustice that drives so many people to move. So it's obviously has been, especially over the past 3 weeks, has been really great. Obviously, so far, unfortunately, it has not been reflected in the official standing on what's going on in Gaza, especially in the US and the UK. But it has been really crucial, and it's also crucial that this moment continues, that this pressure continues, that this activism continues, because this is one of the ways that residents of or citizens of these countries can increase and mount the pressure on their governments to impose an arms embargo, to say that weapons should not be exported to Israel, that Israel can use to commit grave violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law and the rights of Palestinians. So all of this is important, and it's important to build on that, to take advantage of what's being organized, to make it sustained and long-standing.
We have a question here asking what organizations are set up to help women in particular now and when the war stops.
Yeah, right now it's because of why large scale the destruction and the bombardment has been in Gaza. Most of the initiatives have been grassroots, familial, mutual aid, in a sense, local aids, not really organized in that sense. It's really impossible to organize in the sense, in different senses. So it's not NGOs. It's mainly just relief, people organizing together, relief, urgent relief. These are the individuals who organize together to offer help, but it's really difficult to talk about any attempts of organizing because there is almost no spare moment where there is no bombing, no shelling. So, but people kind of they organize as much as they can, especially in areas that also witness bombardment, but to which there are many IDPs flee, like Rafah. So people, sometimes women and others on the spot, family members, neighborhoods, offer shelter, offer help, try to support each other. Some of the women in the UNRWA who staying in the schools told me that with time we didn't know each other before the war, but with time it feels like we're one family. We support each other with whatever little means we have, because almost all of them are destitute in terms of lacking access to men, and because of the siege, because of the restrictions on accessing the crossing, including through Rafah, it's been very difficult for any outside assistance to enter, including medics, including paramedics, including all that's needed. So inside Gaza, people are organizing on the spot. This is what the situation allows, really. We can't talk about any form of, it's impossible to talk about anything else at this situation.
Yeah.
And after the war, obviously it's very important that that solidarity networks continue, expand beyond the war, that reconstruction is not used as a way to blackmail Palestinians, that yeah.
Yeah. Budur, this is relating to the last question in your answer. Several Israeli politicians and news networks have indicated that there's a hope and there's an aim to displace Palestinians to Egypt. But despite what's going on in the north of Gaza and in the south, there's been immense stories of resilience and steadfastness. And we know that women are not only victims, but they're also agents. And they have their own agency. From your work, what are some examples of incredible, inspiring stories of resilience amongst the Palestinians right now in Gaza?
Yeah, it's always never just about victimhood. It's always about so it's also important to recall that despite everything, there are tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands perhaps, who still remain in northern Gaza and Gaza City, either because they chose not to leave or because they couldn't leave at all. We First of all, I have to mention the solidarity with people fleeing, helping each other, especially those who can't leave on foot, who had to be people. There are stories of almost complete strangers helping people on a wheelchair move all the way from Shifa Hospital to the south, all the way on a wheelchair. So the support that there is, people kind of always trying to invent new ways of dealing. Okay, there is little water, there is no electricity, there is no fuel. So how people even take advantage, how people try to reinvent ways in order to stay together, in order to help one another despite everything. So, and it's never either or, it's always also important. Yes, the people of Gaza are resilient and they're steadfast, but also they have had to endure an unprecedented enormity of bombardment and destruction, that it's impossible to just stay resilient. People are allowed, and when we say that people can be almost on the verge or are breaking down, it's not, it does not exclude them being resilient. It's that these can happen in together. One can be incredibly resilient, but also what Palestinians in Gaza are facing is so awful, so severe, so devastating. And especially for the families, especially for those who are trying their best to protect their families, to help their families, to fight for justice for their families, to somehow write. We've heard about poets, about Hiba, about other women poets, women artists who have been trying, despite everything, to produce art, to write, to photograph, to document what's going in Gaza. Many of them have been killed with their entire families. Some of them are tired. Most of them are exhausted and tired, because it's only natural. Because sometimes when your only concern, when the only thing you can do is just to make sure that your child has enough to eat, and at many occasions your child does not have much to eat. So yeah, it's really difficult to actually combine both, but somehow, yeah, exactly, the solidarity between people, the attempts to kind of somehow reinvent ways to live, to create life despite the sea of death swarming everything. It's, I think, also one of the manifestations of the incredible. I mean, when we talked with amputees who there was one example of a woman who lost both legs, had both legs amputated, and still thinks that she wants to have a better future for her community. And it's incredible strength, and both coexist, they kind of cohabit, the strength, the resilience, but also the fear, the despair, the disillusionment with an entire system, really, that allowed this to happen. Yeah.
Budur, thank you very much for your wisdom and for your work. It's truly, it's very, very important topic, and it's important to keep this in mind. And we thank you for you coming on to Kumi, and also your general work with Amnesty. So thank you very much, Budur.
Thank you all for your time.
Now we will transition to our Kumi action and to a bit more of activism that we usually do weekly. But perhaps before we introduce our Kumi action of this week that we sent out in our newsletter, Ryan has a poll. which I request everybody to fill it out so we can have a better indicator of how to make ourselves a bit more effective in our advocacy and in our activism. So the poll, I believe, is now up on screen, and it has a few questions, and if you can answer them fast, we could transition to our Kumi action after the poll. And this, for us at Kumi and at Sabil, will give us a great indicator of how best to tailor our Kumi action to our attendees. For around 70% of the attendees have filled out the poll. Those who haven't, please do so. It will really help us. And for those who have just finished the poll, you're welcome to click on the link of the Kumi Now action. And we have sent it on the newsletter. And we can introduce our Kumi action of the week. So with the time remaining, we've dedicated to 3 actions actually to do for this Kumi. Ryan, if you could share your screen. So the logic of the Kumi action of this week was to target firstly for our UK audience in particular, but everybody can join in this, is to target the Member of Parliament in the UK, Rushanara Ali, who was supporting Palestine, but she voted to abstain from the recent ceasefire vote last week. So we've attached her email on the comments, and it's also on the newsletter. And if you can email her saying, calling her and putting pressure on her to support a ceasefire and express anger for her abstaining from the vote, that would be very, very helpful. The second action of this week is more targeted to North American audiences. And we're using the platform of FaxZero, which you can send faxes for free. And we want to send faxes to the office of Justin Trudeau. And you can put pressure on him, express dissatisfaction and his stance of not having a ceasefire. He has been receiving quite a lot of pressure, and we want to add to that. And I'll just read out some of what Ryan put. If your email and if your fax isn't going through, that means it's working and it's overflowing, and there's a lot of pressure being sent. And attached also in the newsletter and on the comments is the address for the fax to be sent. And again, this website, FaxZero, we have a link, and it is sending free faxes to the office of Justin Trudeau. Lastly, for those who are not necessarily in North America or in the UK, we have created images. Ryan has designed them, of highlighting the call for ceasefire with the art of Banksy. And this is on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So I think it would be great if you can share those images that Kumi has created for a ceasefire. That would be great. This is again on Facebook, and Ryan has now attached them on the chat. So thank you very much for filling out the poll. Nearly everyone has filled it out, so I deeply appreciate that. Thank you for your solidarity and your work and all the efforts that you do to promote ceasefire and justice. I'd like to thank everybody at the Kumi team for helping this, and also Budur for giving an excellent presentation. I hope to see you next week for a session with Peter Sambrook, who he'll be discussing his book on the British policy of deceit in Palestine, which might illuminate the current politics in Britain. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Let's all continue working for a ceasefire and hopefully see you all next week. Goodbye, everyone.